Thank you for joining us for the panel session today. We have four amazing speakers. My name's Reece Turner. I'm the consumer campaigner with Solar Citizens. Been in the role for a few months now, getting my head around these issues and been helped greatly by our panel today, so I have them to thank personally. Today we're going to be talking about what's holding solar back. And some of you might say, well, a lot of people outside of this room might say, well, nothing. Solar is fantastic. We heard from Nigel and we heard from Claire this morning about how we have 1.5 million households, so that accounts for nearly 5 million people. The growth has been phenomenal, but we've heard also about the ways in which this growth is slowing down, about how incumbents, invested interests, and politicians afraid to show leadership are clawing back the inevitable. And so today we're going to talk about what those problems are, exactly how things are standing in the way of solar going to its inevitable conclusion, helping us reach 100% renewables. First off, like the panel sessions, I'm sure you agree, I wanted to hear from all of them for much longer than we were able to, but that's just a reflection of the incredible talent and interesting speakers that we have. So I'm going to keep a firm eye on the watch so that we can then have some Q&A, some interaction, because I know that there's a lot of people here in the audience who have fantastic viewpoints, and we'll have some really interesting questions which are going to lead to some great discussion. So we've got just 10 minutes from each of these folks. Then we're going to throw it open to you and have a really great discussion. So Nigel Morris, we don't need any more introduction from him. We've heard a lot from him, so I'm going to let him launch straight into it. Nigel.
Well, thank you. We've heard this morning's sessions are a really good dive into lots of the kind of minutiae of things that have worked for and against renewables and the uptake of renewables. And I was having a really interesting conversation at lunchtime, actually, it reminded me that if you distill all the things that are slowing the uptake of renewables down in Australia if you could distill them all down into one thing, then I think it's this. I think one of the major issues that we have is that state budgets in particular are incredibly reliant on conventional fuels. So it's a while since I've done the numbers, but going back a couple of years, I had a really interesting conversation with our current Premier in New South Wales, Mike Baird, who was the Treasurer then. I was nearby to him, and we used to drop down to his office every now and again and say, Mike, how's it going? Remember us? We're from Solar. And he'd say, oh, yeah, you're those guys who are costing us $1 billion a year. It's really annoying. You know, how much more of my time do you want? And we actually started a really interesting conversation with him about where we could see that solar was going to go and how much state revenue was at risk. And in fact, in New South Wales and Queensland at the time, about 16% of state revenue was coming from the non-renewable sector. So from coal royalties, from transmission and distribution royalties, from energy royalties, whole smattering of different things associated with non-renewable energy. So although they'll talk nicely to you, and if they're feeling good about renewables, they might even throw you a feed-in tariff or something else. The fundamentals of this are that whilst ever 16% or thereabouts of state revenue is coming from the incumbent non-renewable industry, there is a major problem for state budgets. There is a major problem in them supporting the uptake of solar. And they'll stroke us and be nice to us and say the right things, but at the end of the day, when they're sitting there with their cabinet pals trying to work out how to balance the budget and how to keep the voters happy, at some point they're going to say, the single biggest revenue source that we've got is from coal and the associated energy transmission networks. So until we find an alternative to replace that revenue stream with, they're not going to be inclined to do something. And being government, and even network companies, I have some sympathy for them. They don't have the resources that they'd probably like to have, and government doesn't necessarily have the time to do all this analysis. And we actually encouraged them and asked them a series of questions, said, have you thought about how much revenue you won't have if solar keeps growing, for example? And have you thought about how you might replace that revenue? And of course, they never got back to us. But they're really, really important questions to ask. And the conversation I was having at lunchtime, and in all the conversations, I've forgotten the young lass's name, forgive me. But what they're actually doing now is starting to look at how do we, what kind of job replacement strategies can we have in place? And I'd go one step further and say, as a group, how can we find ways to replace that state revenue? Because until we do that, we're not really going to get much engagement. And so, as an example, one of the things that we put to Mike Baird and to the head of Networks New South Wales at the time was run some rough numbers, but if you work out that, you know, solar's going to keep growing like this, if you opened the floodgates for us and you said, let's make solar really easy, let's encourage it, let's reduce some barriers, let's reduce the connection costs, for example, then we could actually make it go like this. And if you do the numbers, if we gave you 0.1% of the revenue stream that we can create as solar generators, if we were prepared to give you a little bit back in exchange for replacing that lost revenue, how does that balance out? And we haven't done all those numbers yet. But to me, there's a really interesting story in there somewhere that we have to grapple with, and that is how do we replace that? Because until we do, they're not really going to be too happy.
Thanks, Nigel. That's fantastic. And I think kind of mirrored something that Jess Hill said in her presentation as well, that we bang on about the networks being the problem, and they clearly are a large part of the problem. And we always, we often cite that networks need to come up to speed, become more service-oriented, perhaps become like the telcos. But it is our job, in the absence of them coming up with these ideas, to put forward those proposals, do some modelling perhaps, and imagine the future for these interests, whether the state government, whether networks, whatever, to make good of the future. The next speaker we have is Nicky Ison, who would be known to many of you here as well. She is the go-to person for community power in Australia, pretty much. Has been involved in lots of campaigns to get community energy developments off the ground. She's a research fellow at the Institute for Sustainable Futures at UTS New South Wales, and she's been a founding director of Solar Citizens. So I'm going to get her slideshow up and hand the mic over to Nicky.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for that, Nigel. I thought you were going to talk about barriers to residential solar more specifically. So my slides start with a bit of a dovetail to that. We'll see how we go. I'm going to talk tomorrow in plenary at the end of the day about what is community energy and why it's great. This session is a little bit more technical around what are some of the barriers. But I wanted to talk about, well, why are we bothering to talk about community energy in the first place? And I think it's because it's a barrier. It's a solution in and of itself. So one of the barriers to solar at a residential level is some people can't access it. We have there's a constraint in the market share because people rent, or they have shady roofs, or they live in apartments. So perhaps community solar might be a solution to some of these things, and that's sort of the work that I'm doing a lot of focus on at the moment. We're calling it Renewables for All. What are the business models? What are the mechanisms? What are the policies that enable all Australians, no matter where you live, no matter what your income, how can we all benefit from this renewable energy transition? And I think community solar is and community renewables more generally, is a really big part of that, the answer to that question. But there's a whole bunch of barriers to community solar and community energy generally. I'm going to talk about 4, and I might, Reese, you'll have to wrap me up, because it's a bit technical. So the first one is, there's nothing, we can't in Australia do this thing called local energy trading. So I want you to imagine you're in your house, you've got solar on your roof. Who here's got solar on their roof? All right, but your next door neighbour's got a shady roof, and you've got a good relationship with your next door neighbour, and you like to maybe double the size of your solar installation. They might own it and they use the electricity from it. That's what you'd like to do. It'd be called peer-to-peer energy or local energy trading. You've got solar on your roof and your next door neighbour uses it. There is no legal reason why you can't do that in Australia at the moment, but there is an economic reason why you can't do that. If you look at, what? Yeah. And another model might be that you, take a step back. So you could use electricity from your neighbour's roof, but you could also all buy into a centralised solar facility at the edge of town. Maybe it's at the local tip, or maybe it's on a disused warehouse roof in a neighbouring suburb, and you all put solar on the roof, and then you use it, and you have that credited against your electricity bill, because you can't put solar on your own roof. Or maybe you've already put solar on your own roof and you want to do more. But you can't do that for a really simple reason, and that's the cost of the network. Because if you export to the grid, you're only going to get paid about 5 cents for every kilowatt hour of electricity you generate. Bit under. I just pulled these numbers off the Queensland Government website last night. It's a standard Queensland electricity tariff. But if you go behind the meter, if you put it on your own property, on your own commercial building or your own residential building, you're offsetting whole retail price. And the volumetric charges, as we heard earlier, are coming down, but they're still 22 cents. And that's a good amount of money, and you can make a solar business model stack up for that. But if you're only getting 5 cents worth of revenue for every unit of electricity that you generate. So if you own a solar array on your neighbour's roof or in that centralised solar facility, and you put in a couple of $1,000s, it's going to take a really, really, really long time to pay that investment back, and you're better off, just putting your money somewhere else. It doesn't make economic sense. We can do it because we want to do it, and that's great, but you may as well just donate, really. It's not an investment-based model. That fundamental economics of being that you have to pay the full cost of the network, even if you're only using 10 metres or 100 metres or even a kilometre of the network. You're paying for the full thousands of kilometres of the network that exist in the state and in the NEM right now. So I was trying to explain what behind the meter is. Have people heard the term behind the meter? Okay, so basically every household has a meter. What you do on your side of the meter, your property, you've got to obey some rules, but there's not many rules. Whereas as soon as you go past the meter into the mainstream electricity network, you got to play by the big boys' rules. And that's why you have to pay the full cost, and it just doesn't stack up. And so that means that ideas around electricity trading, around solar gardens, which is the model I've got up on the slide here, you can do it in the US, you can do it in the Netherlands, you can do it in the UK, you can't do it in Australia at the moment. Not because it's illegal, but because you can't make it stack up economically. So that's the first one, no local energy trading. So that means if we can't export electricity to the grid, it means that we have to go behind the meter. And if you want to do a community solar project like Repower Shoalhaven in New South Wales, or like group in the Sunshine Coast is trying to do here, and they've got a great site, a local medical centre that I think they're working with, you've got to find the right host site who uses electricity every day during the day, but they don't use so much electricity that they're getting really cheap power bills. Because a university like this one that uses like thousands of megawatt hours gets really cheap electricity compared to you and I. So you can't have too big an energy user, but you can't have too small an energy user. So you've got to find the right host site. And getting the right host site for a behind-the-meter solar project that the community can invest in, and I'll talk more about this tomorrow, sorry, so that you and I could put $1,000 in or $500 and buy us a couple of solar panels and get a check once a year. That sounds like a nice idea, let's do that. But you've got to find a right solar host site, and they're few and far between. This is Repower Shoalhaven. They're one of the first examples of doing a behind-the-meter community solar project. It's a 100 kilowatt solar array on the Shoalhaven Heads Bowling Club. You can see the bowling greens down here. And it's owned by the community. It's owned by a community company called Repower Shoalhaven, and it's got 20 local member investors, and it's doing great things. But it took them a really, really long time to find that host site in the Shoalhaven Heads Bowling Club, and they've only been able to find 2 since then, and this was built 18 months ago. Chris Cooper, the brains behind that, is arriving this afternoon. I'll introduce you if you want to find out more. He's a great guy. So So that's my second barrier to community solar. Third barrier is nothing to do with the energy market at all. It's the Corporations Act. So the thing that we're seeing here is the rise of the sharing economy, the rise of more people like you and I wanting to play a more active role in industries that were traditionally delivered by monopolies or by, people that we had nothing to do with. And that's happening in telecommunications, it's happening in the internet, it's happening in energy, and it's happening in the creative industries, it's happening all over the place. The thing is that our whole economy is not set up for lots and lots of small people investing small amounts of money in interesting startup enterprises. People heard of the term crowdfunding? So crowdfunding, when you do it now, mainly it's donations. You provide a donation. But in other parts of the world, you can also invest through crowdfunding. It's called equity crowdfunding. The problem is, at the moment, if you want to invest in a solar array that's, say, only 80 kilowatts, because, for that host site reason, you've got to find a host site that's not using too much electricity. So you want to do an 80 kilowatt system. The financial compliance of creating a public company so that thousands of people or hundreds of people can invest from your local community, sounds like a nice idea. Let's have everyone invest in a lovely community solar array on top of this roof. The compliance costs completely kill the business model. You may as well donate because you're not going to get money back, because the cost of setting up that public company and administering it every year, just it's set up for a BHP Billiton, or it's set up for a much larger organisation than your local community group. So you can only have 20 people. We want hundreds of people to be able to invest in that solar array, and in order to do that, we need changes to the Corporations Act. Why am I talking about the Corporations Act? I don't know why I'm talking about the Corporations Act. I'm an engineer and an activist by background, and I end up spending most of my days talking about finances, because in the end, that's what a lot of community energy and solar energy comes down to. You've got to understand the technical, but you've got to understand the finance too. And then finally, and I think this is what Jess was trying to get up this morning, it's the system, stupid. You're not stupid, they're stupid. We have a system that was set up for one-way flows of energy from large centralised generators to passive consumers, where there were just a few market actors. So there might be 20 or 30 large generators, 100 max. There might be 20 or 30 distribution and transmission companies. And then there'll be millions of passive consumers. That's fine. We can deal with passive consumers. They just take energy and pay their bills every quarter. They're fine. We don't need to worry about them. That's not what we have now. We have an energy system that's going to look like this, with electric vehicles and people wanting to buy solar from their neighbours and participate in shared solar in that local solar farm at the edge of town, or a community wind farm at the edge of town. And they're going to want to do it in dynamic and interested in innovative ways. And there's going to be startups and so many different things. Our rules are not set up for that. They can't handle it. The rules simply do not exist. So that's what Stephen Bygrave was saying earlier. We need fundamental energy market reform. We've got to change the system, because the system was not designed for the future that is inevitable. And I suppose what I've been saying is what we have is an unstoppable force of this energy transition, with the 1.5 million solar roofs and solar homes, and the 1.5 million more who want to have solar on their roof and want to have storage and want to have electric vehicles. And that unstoppable force, with declining economics, coming up against an immovable object that is our regulator, our market operator, and our government, and our state and federal government in their policymakers, in how the energy system is set up. So, we've got this situation: unstoppable force, immovable object. What's going to happen? A big explosion of some sort. So how do we fix it? There's a network credit rule change. Come talk to me afterwards. We need a host site campaign to get lots of awesome host sites to put up solar. We should have some funding for community solar projects. And we should reform how the Corporations Act works. That's the short term. The long term, we need to reboot our energy market. We need to redesign the system and the rules. We need to rewrite our national electricity objective so it says that our energy system should operate not only in the long-term interests of consumers with respect to price, but also with respect to the environment and climate change. And finally, please come to the Homegrown Power Plan session that Miriam Lyons is talking about tomorrow, because that's where we talk in more detail about what are the policies we need to do all of that. And sorry if that was way too technical.
But it was on time. I don't think it was too technical. Can we give a big clap for Nicky and make it double as big to make up for one we didn't give to Nigel?
What time is your session tomorrow, Nicky?
There's two sessions. The one is in the plenary in the morning, and then there's another session on 100% renewables, one of the panel sessions.
Same.
Miriam will be speaking.
Okay, thanks everyone. And I didn't mention before, but we have an hour and a half, so approximately 45 minutes of these wonderful talks from our panellists, and then lots of time for discussion after. Our next speaker is Richard Romanowski, and Richard is an investor in clean tech technologies. He's got a background as a senior executive in a range of organisations. He's passionate about clean, green technology. And along with Nigel, his companies have been sponsoring this event, so we thank him very much for that. Richard is going to talk in particular about the commercial sphere in which his company exists, what kinds of things are holding back solar in the commercial sector, and ways that we could change that to help commercial solar grow. Thanks, Richard.
Thank you. Thank you. First and foremost, it's an honor to be here, and thank you very much for your activism. Please keep doing it. Don't stop. And it's very important. And Nigel, thank you. And Nicky. GoZERO is focused on the commercial sector. So for us, the starting point, of course, is that Australia is, on a per capita basis, I think, Nigel, I'm right, is saying we're the highest in the world. So we've got the most solar panels or households or mini power stations on roofs than anywhere else in the world. But when you compare that to commercial, we're horrible. We're probably not even in the top 100, I don't even think, Nigel. So like in the US, Europe, IKEA and all those, all the commercial sites have got solar and tons of solar. It's 500 kilowatts, not 5 kilowatts or a megawatt per roof. And it makes a big difference. It's a big part of us achieving our 100% renewable Australia target, is to get this commercial sector, the rooftop sector, to engage and do their part, I guess is what I'm saying. So what's the problem? There's a few. I've got three. There's a micro and a macro. The split incentive, the landlord pays for the PV, but the tenant gets the benefit. So why would I put my money up and put solar on the roof when I get no payback, right? So there's, it's just pure money. Back to, over and over again, money. There are solutions. The PPAs, power purchase agreements, are really, in theory, simple. I will put, as a third-party investor, solar on the roof, cost the landlord nothing, cost the tenant nothing. I sell the cheaper, clean energy to the tenant, and the landlord gets a greener building. His building goes up in price because he's got a green power plant on his roof. Real simple, hard to sell. It's doable. It's only beginning here in Australia. The other one is environmental upgrade agreements. So the same concept is, and so in Melbourne is where it started. New South Wales have this legislation. But in Queensland, we don't have that legislation. But basically, it's the landlord can upgrade the building, and I can put solar on the roof, but I actually get a loan, and that loan gets paid back through my rates, and then allows me to charge the tenant and therefore get a return on investment. It is a huge, phenomenal mechanism that we need to use. So solutions I'm proposing for you guys is real simple. If you have a workplace, promote solar in the workplace. You'd be surprised how loud a voice you have in the community. That same voice in your workplace can make a huge difference. Because the CEO, if you're not the CEO, will listen to you and make a difference. And they'll phone Nigel or me up sooner or later and ask for a quote. That's fine. But, the other one is there's no environmental upgrade agreements in Queensland, and I'm not sure about other states, so I put it on your target list of, it's such a simple legislative issue that we need to have here. And promote solar to landlords. You'd be surprised how many people own small commercial premises that they rent out to tenants. So it's not just households, it's commercial side of the world that you can attack. The other problem is in a commercial building, that horrible thing called network charges or called demand charges is a big part of my bill. It's 50% of my bill. Sometimes 70%, sometimes 30%. It's huge, right? And so you come to me and say, put solar on the roof, and I go, yeah, but you're not solving my problem. I got a huge energy bill. Solve my energy bill. Solve my whole problem, right? And so we try to sell the guy solar, and he goes, and we give him a cost benefit, and we save his bill by 5%, and he goes, pissed, buzz off, because did I say that nicely? So the solution is more than just solar. It gets very complex in the commercial field. It's about reducing demand or energy efficiency. It's back to, and again, it is a very big part of if we're going to have a renewable, focused society, this is critical. Right? This has to happen. Every building has to be efficient. We have to live efficiently. All the stuff that we heard about Nigel living off of batteries is effectively what we have to do in our workplace. So this is LED lighting. It's heating, it's air conditioning, it's your insulation, it's your power factor correction and batteries. So there's a whole range of things in there. Again, for you guys, it's still the same stuff because it's very complex. Engineers do this sort of stuff. You just got to scream loud and clear, and if the tenant or the landlord actually wants to do something, there's many ways for them to do this, right? You don't have to be a technical expert. If you are an engineer, talk to us. If you're not, it's just scream, right? Because there's lots and lots of suppliers out there who'll do this for a building. One of the things that happens, we're finding, is that insulation and LED lighting is the easiest, fastest, best return on investment, but it's not sexy. So we're finding most people put solar in. So this is consumer behavior I'm trying to explain, is we're finding they're putting solar in, and then they do the energy efficiency later, as opposed to the usual engineering logic is I'll do energy efficiency first. Right? But we don't care. As long as they do both. They got to do both, right? So just my 2 cents on that. So my message is keep screaming. The other one is then links into what the macro that Nigel and Nicky were saying is it's the big picture has to change, and you guys can make a big difference. The poles and wires is our money we've put in. This is our taxpayers' money that these guys, the DNS, the Energex or the Oregon or the private sector, they're making $1 squillion off of those poles and wires. That's the old system, right? We want to move to the system of the future, the distributed energy generation, where there's a power plant on every house and every farm and everything like that. Now, and that means a massive change, but it's our money that Queensland government makes $800 million a year as a dividend from Energex. Now that is an indirect tax. So we have to, it's back to what you're saying, Nicky. We've got to change the whole system. There are solutions. This is overly simplistic summary. For me, it's the poles and wires. We need the poles and wires to work because not everyone, we need poles and wires to be a sustainable business model. That sustainable business model has to be supportive or facilitate distributed energy generation. And that means, at the moment, Nicky said, it's one-way power. They need to get paid for two-way power. They call it clip the ticket. So they like an agent, they get commission if you buy power, or they get commission if you sell power. So that way you can sell power to the next door neighbor, right? Simple concept, making it work and making it happen. So a whole range of other things. And with that comes no more gold plating. And with it comes that instead of gold plating the network, I put batteries into my house or in my business, and that stops the need to upgrade the network, but it keeps power prices down. So it's a whole paradigm shift in the whole model. So again, I'm just adding to Nicky and Nigel's comment that this is really important, and to me, this is my plea to solar citizens. All the other stuff is important, but this is the most important because none of the other, we can't hit 100% if this doesn't happen, right? And Nicky can't put her community solar in beyond a few nominal sites, right? If this doesn't happen, this is really important. So so we still have to keep keep our short-term advocacy happening, but this is this is it. This is what matters, right? I'll finish with my little sales pitch. This is us, GoZERO. We're engineers. We put financing in, so we'll do the PPAs. We will put batteries into place in the future. So I'm done.
Thank you, Richard. Thanks so much. Next up, we've got Jack Gilding. So Jack will be known to many of you as well. He's been a passionate supporter and advocate for solar citizens, but he's worked with many other groups, the Alternative Technology Association, the Total Environment Centre. He has been the executive officer of Hepburn Wind. I think it was the first community cooperative for renewable power in Australia. He, at the moment, is working closely with solar citizens on a project to look at the various feed-in tariffs that are happening in 3 jurisdictions around Australia, including here in Queensland. As many of us are only too acutely aware, we've had a legacy of big bonus schemes, solar bonus schemes as they're called in different states, which really has led Australia, as Richard said, to the biggest, highest penetration of solar rooftops in the world. I think we're at 15%, and the nearest country after us is Belgium on 7%. So that's why Tesla and other companies are seeing Australia as a testing ground for other technologies to flow from solar. So Jack is working on a way to try and get us back from having the huge solar bonus legacies to now an absolute minuscule pittance that you'll get if you put your solar array on now of 4, 5, 6 cents, and trying to estimate and calculate and demonstrate to the utilities that it's worth much more than that. I'm just going to try and find out where. Here it is. Thanks, Jack.
Thanks, Reece. Is that ready to go? Yep, thanks. Thanks, everybody. One of the problems of being last is that all the good points have been taken. So some of this will be familiar territory, but we also will delve into a little bit more detail. So this is the dilemma that's already been explained several times, but most of you are used to, if you buy and sell something, you don't get the same price when you buy it or when you sell it as when you bought it. But it's pretty severe in the electricity industry. If you buy electricity, you pay 24 to 30 cents. If you sell electricity, you get nothing to 6 cents. And the irony is that electricity that you sell for 6 cents will almost certainly go into the house down the road using a couple of 100 metres of cable at the most. So why is it so? Who makes the rules? is it fair, and what can we do about it? Probably don't need this to say this probably, but a feed-in tariff is what what you're paid by your retailer for the electricity you put back into the grid. Now, how important is it? And in terms of the barriers, and I guess the first thing to say is it can be overstated, because it is important that people realise that if you can consume the electricity you produce yourself, then it's worth 20 to 30 cents to you. So it's only the electricity that you don't use yourself at the time that the feed-in tariff is relevant to. So it's important to have that perspective on it. But I still think that the low feed-in tariffs are a problem. And so the problems are, firstly, they make it much harder to do the calculations. If all of your electricity is worth 20 cents or 24 cents, or if you're really lucky, 40 cents, then you know what your solar is going to earn you, and you can do the calculation and decide whether it's an investment. But if you have to understand how much of your electricity you're going to save 24 cents and how much you're going to get paid 6 cents, then it's much harder for you to know whether solar is worth doing. So it's just a real discouragement to people being able to make a decision about investing. And alongside of that, obviously, it reduces the total amount of money that you get, and so that also affects the economics of going solar. And the other thing is that it encourages people to put in smaller PV systems. People aren't actually doing this, which is interesting, that the average size of solar systems is not going down, despite, and so there's a number of different factors, because the systems are getting cheaper. So it's not actually leading to smaller systems particularly, but if you do that calculation and only install for what you can use during the daytime, and that's particularly hard if it's a residential house and people are working outside the house, then you're going to install smaller systems, and that's a real waste at a community level, because here's somebody who's going to install solar, they're going to spend a few $1,000s, they're going to put electricity into the system, they're going to put it into the system close to where it's being used, and you're discouraging them by not giving them what it's worth. And so as a social policy problem, it means that you're discouraging investment in renewable energy. So this project that I'm currently project managing involves collaboration with all of these organisations here, so it's a pretty impressive kind of bunch of people who are helping with this project, and it's funded by Energy Consumers Australia, which is a national body that is part of the National Electricity System. So what we're doing is we're summarising the existing research. So arguments have been had about feed-in tariffs backwards and forwards for quite a few years. So there's a lot of government documents, there's a lot of submissions from community organisations back into those inquiries, and a lot of these arguments have been hashed around a few times. So what we're doing is collecting all that. I've already done a bibliography of all of these documents, collecting the arguments and then summarising them. We are also making submissions. As been mentioned, there are 3 feed-in tariff inquiries going on at the moment. There's one in Queensland by the Queensland Productivity Commission, there's one in Tasmania by the Tasmanian Office of the Economic Regulator, and there's one in Victoria by the Essential Services Commission. So that's kind of quite handy, because that's given us a few economies of scale in getting the information together and lobbying. And so we are both producing submissions to those inquiries, but we're also producing the summary material about the arguments about feed-in tariff, so that inevitably when these issues come up again in other jurisdictions, it's a lot easier for groups and individuals to make the arguments. So who determines feed-in tariffs? It's very much a state-by-state basis, but there are some national principles agreed by COAG, the Council of Australian Governments. And the other thing is that all of these people who set these feed-in tariffs, they're all regulators of different sorts, and they all watch and read each other's reports quite closely, and they copy each other's arguments. And so it's important, if you can influence one, then you have an indirect influence on the others as well. And at the moment, we have I hope we have a particular opportunity where we've got 2 inquiries that are initiated by new Labor governments that are got terms of reference that are more sympathetic to renewable energy. We've yet to see whether that translates into actual recommendations or not. So the national principles, basically the national principles were came out of the process of arm twisting to get all of the states to drop their premium feed-in tariffs. So as well as just the cost of some of those schemes, some of which are very high, there was also pressure from at the national level onto state governments to say that feed-in tariffs should be cost reflective, should not impose costs on other consumers. But there are a couple of useful points in those, so they were part of a political push to actually lower feed-in tariffs, but there are a couple of protections or a couple of points in those national principles that are useful. One is that the feed-in tariff should be reflect the value of that energy in the relevant electricity market. And the taking into account the time of day is pretty interesting because no feed-in tariffs do that at the moment, and solar tends to feed in during the daytime and when loads are high, so it is actually, you can make the argument that it's worth more because it's fed in at the time of day when energy is more valuable. And there's also some consumer protections in there. Who decides and how much do you get? So some places have no mandated feed-in tariff. New South Wales in particular, you leave it up to the retailer, and a lot of retailers offer nothing, or if they do, they offer less than what even the regulator says it's worth. Having spent quite a few years on this issue, you read all the arguments, you engage with the regulators, you talk to power companies and network providers, and you tend to end up kind of at least understanding where they're coming from. And so it's important to understand their mindset. And I guess where I've come to is that there is a mindset that says that solar energy is not worth a lot. That mindset requires saying, well, we've made this huge investment in a grid, so we better use it. And that's the real world, and all this other stuff's a bit airy-fairy. That's getting a little bit harder to sustain. We have an oversupply of energy because we've got a whole lot of ailing coal-fired power plants that nobody's game to close down. We've got a lot of generation capacity. Also, people are using less electricity and being more efficient. So that we're not using as much electricity. And also this mindset requires you to say, it's not my problem that the world is getting too hot, dangerously hot, and it's not my problem that burning coal is ruining people's health. So, and I don't want to be too sarcastic about it, but there is a whole mindset there of why solar is seen as not the solution, but as an irritant, I guess. But if you come up from the other side and say, what's the future that we want? And people have described that very eloquently today. If you want a system that's decentralised, robust, healthy, then solar is obviously a huge part of that system. Then you get down to the guts of this project, which is looking at the different components of what energy is worth. And you work outwards from what it's, and I might, this is an American slide, and it's just quite good in terms of the way it presents the different issues, starting from the benefit to the grid, going out to financial benefits, energy security, environmental and social. Sorry, my Australian take on this is not quite as pretty yet, but so the benefits to the electricity system, the three on the right are the only ones that are currently recognised in feed-in tariffs. So a feed-in tariff is based on wholesale cost of energy, avoided network losses, and some ancillary fees. Even the benefits within the electricity system aren't recognised in a feed-in tariff. So as we said, you don't use the transmission network at all. You use a relatively small part of the distribution network. What's called the merit order effect. The more renewable energy is fed in, the lower energy prices are for everybody. So that's another benefit to the electricity system of solar. And a lot of capital expenditure can be avoided because people are investing their own money, and that means you need less central power stations and you need less network. So all of those costs should be rewarded. Then you get down to the environmental benefits. It is renewable energy, it is reducing our CO2 emissions. 195 governments have, in theory, agreed that we have an absolutely urgent task to reduce our CO2 emissions. So shouldn't people who are doing that, paying their own money, investing in solar, be rewarded for that? And the health benefits are quite substantial. There is an excellent report that we'll be summarising about the cost in public health of air pollution from burning fossil fuels, and it is quite substantial. And then you get a whole bunch of kind of ancillary benefits, energy security, obviously the system designed properly can be much more robust with decentralised energy. People who install solar panels understand, look at their energy use, as Nigel's example of living on a 1 or 2 kilowatt system. The more responsibility you take for your own energy, the more literate you are about it and the more involved you are in the policies around it. Price stability, obviously once you've made the upfront capital investment, the energy is cheap from then on. That's my 10 minutes plus a bit, isn't it? So I better very quickly go to what's an activist to do. Raising community awareness is really important. Lots of people believe, and you know, in the past you could say it might have been true that some solar owners were heavily subsidised. It's certainly not the case now. They're heavily undercompensated. So we need to get out in public and make that message. You need to lobby politicians. I probably don't need to explain why that's worthwhile, except to say that as well as making the decisions, they set the rules. They set the terms of reference for feed-in tariff inquiries. So that's another sort of point of pressure. Engage with the regulators. This is what this project's about, and I guess one of the reasons I'm in Brisbane from Hobart is to recruit for this. So if you're interested in getting into the nitty-gritty of arguments about different components of a feed-in tariff, we'd love to have your assistance in engaging with the regulators, helping draft material. And not worrying about it is always an option. We have some huge global challenges facing us, and if you're doing something else useful, don't divert into feed-in tariff technical arguments.
Thank you, Jack. That's the end of our little session from our panellists. So before we go into Q&A, we've got a good chunk of time. I thought get everyone to stand up and feel a bit energised by giving all our panellists and yourselves a big round of applause. Panellists might like to do this too before we engage in robust discussion. Thanks. So I might kick it off myself if I can. That was a huge, comprehensive range of the issues facing solar. It's amazing to see where we've got, given all those challenges. But one of the challenges that Jack actually alluded to, but we haven't gone through in detail because we didn't have anyone who's an expert on this, if you like, is we've seen increasingly the issue around so much excess capacity of electricity on our grid, on our network, and in fact, Australia's largest investor in both fossil fuels and in renewables, AGL, the most polluting company in Australia, but also the biggest investor in renewables, ironically, has come out and said that they're not going to invest in any more renewables until we get excess capacity off the grid. That means shutting down, ideally, brown coal-fired power stations. So I thought I'd just get a response from our panellists on that. What do you think in terms of that as a priority? How big a question is that issue as compared to, say, getting a secure RET that's enlarged, or a commitment to 100%? Your responses to that while everyone else thinks of their questions for the panel.
Well, so it's a really interesting point, actually, and I used to have a widget on my old website called the New Normalometer, where I actually tracked the number of power stations that was closing down in Australia each year and the capacity, and how much solar was coming online, and updated every month. And it was pretty interesting to see how much capacity is coming offline. And in fact, I think I read somewhere the other day that in the US last year, 14 gigawatts of coal-fired capacity came offline. About 5% of the total American coal capacity came offline last year. Huge, wow. Huge numbers. And you're quite right, I think, Reece, to raise this, because it is a huge issue, because there are two big implications with that. One is obviously there's a cost and a challenge to get them to come offline. And ironically, a few years ago, we had a payments for closure program. It may have been imperfect, but there was a payments for closure program that was starting to take effect, that gave us a mechanism to actually shut those plants down. And I think the second one is that we've seen a couple of examples which are actually fairly terrifying, where a coal-fired power plant was sold in New South Wales a year or so ago for $1. The rectification costs of those sites often is really, really terribly undersubscribed. So there is a potential looming disaster if power station owners aren't forced to really, if the legislation isn't changed for those remediation costs to be really taken into account. There's a looming problem like we have in the coal mining sector, where people can walk away, they can go bankrupt and walk away and say, well, we run out of money, we can't afford to rectify this site even though we promised to. We potentially got that ahead as well. So I agree, getting that mechanism to incentivise closures and then making sure that people can't just go bankrupt and walk away, that's a big one.
I think Nigel's comprehensively answered that one. Well, without giving us a solution necessarily, but who's got the first question? Oh, Nicky's got a solution.
Do you want me to talk solutions?
Yeah.
So I just add one more thing, which is the social dimension of it. These are communities, where our coal-fired power stations are communities that depend currently on those coal-fired power stations for a significant number of jobs. We need to not only have these companies be responsible for remediating the land, but also supporting the just transition of that community. And governments have a role to play there as well. So it's a real social, environmental, economic, technical kit and caboodle that needs to be addressed. And I think it's certainly in my top 3 of the things that, if we could wave a magic wand and have some kind of policy shift that would grow renewable energy in Australia, that's, in the top 3. So what are the solutions? Well, I'm going to preempt Miriam's thunder tomorrow and tell you about reverse auction coal closure mechanisms. So our emissions reduction fund, it uses a mechanism called reverse auctions. ACT, their wind, they're purchasing lots of wind energy and solar energy at the moment. During part of their 90% renewables target, they're using reverse auctions. Queensland has committed to doing at least 50 megawatts, I think, of reverse auctions. Reverse auctions are basically going, we want X capacity or X outcome, who can do it for the cheapest? So why don't we do the same thing for closing coal? Coal generators can bid in and say, we will do this and we'll pay, this is the price we want to close down. That's exactly what we had under the Clean Energy Future package, and it didn't work. The problem it didn't work is it was paid out of taxpayer revenue. What it needs to be done is paid out of the revenue from coal generators. So if you levy a small amount just on coal generators, and you levy it in proportion to the emissions intensity of that coal generator, then you start to create a pool of funds. That means that there's incentive for the most emissions intensive electricity generators to pay in, to bid in to close down, because they're going to be hit most with the levy. And then that levy can be used to fund the rehabilitation, to fund the shutdown, to fund the retraining that's needed in those communities. It's called coal closure auctions. There's about 4 different policy papers out there around how you could do these things. I think what we're doing in the homegrown power plan that Miriam's going to talk about tomorrow is the best of all of the mechanisms that we've read. I'm really excited about them. The one final thing is that we have excess capacity, and I don't like using that term, but we have lower demand than supply in the energy market, which means it's great. We've got really low wholesale prices, but it's really, really difficult to build a business model off really, really low wholesale prices if you want to do renewables. So we need to get the dirtiest, oldest coal-fired power stations out of the market. And we don't need to just do it in places which have brown coal. We can't just shut down all of the coal-fired power stations in the Latrobe Valley, because there's excess capacity in the rest of the other states. And also that leaves a big hole in Victoria. We've got to shut them down in all states. So one of the final parts is the Australian Energy Market Operator has a suggestion of how much excess capacity there is in each state. So let's set the amount of capacity that we're trying to auction to close based on what our market operator says can be closed.
In that case, we don't have security of supply issues. You don't have all of these technical, engineers jumping up and down and going, but no, we can't do it because they won't have a leg to stand on. That's my solution.
Thanks, Nicky. Okay, let's leave it to you.
This one's for Simon. There was things you said about dealing with New South Wales and the Premier and offering to somehow reduce his revenue problem through contributions from solar users. At least that's what I understood. I have to say I have a real fear of anything which is ever said to a politician which suggests that we should have a solar tax. Sure. And I hope you're going to drop that. On the other side of it, however, maybe you could say to the Premier, well, there's no reason for you to stop getting revenue from those people, households, factories, businesses who can't install solar and have to have it through the grid. Why don't you replace your coal-fired electricity with what Stephen Bargraves is promoting, which is a tower solar, what's the last word? Solar tower something, I can't remember what. But in other words, with renewable energy. Why don't you encourage them to go for a renewable energy solution? Because then we have PV on roofs of people who can put it, and we have the same thing, renewable energy, at the centralised power station level. Thanks.
You want me to respond?
Sure.
Point well taken. And I have to admit to being rooftop solar centric after 23 years, and there are so many issues to deal with. I do tend to focus very, very hard on the bit that I know best. And there is far more to the wider topic than just what I'm really focused on. So point very well taken. To put your mind at ease, although it was in effect a solar tax that I was proposing, the key is that in exchange for that solar tax, they have to give something away. So they have to make putting solar onto the network easier, cheaper, faster, all those types of things. So although we were proposing that we could give them a clip of the ticket, there had to be something that came in exchange. Now, I completely agree, very dangerous territory to go into with anyone in politics, but I guess the point that we were really trying to make, and the best bit about having a conversation with, at that time he was the Treasurer, is you walk into a conversation and he's grumpy and he's unhappy and he's telling us we cost him $1 billion a year, and at some point during the conversation his eyebrows went up and his whole physical nature changed because he realised that he didn't have to look at solar as a problem, that there may be another way for the state budget to balance, for him to not have a great big burden, and for us to be happy as well. So for me, whether that is the mechanism or the program, I really like the sound of what Nicky was talking about as well. That's got great merit. There are a million ways to solve it, but I think the fundamentals of it are that we have to, whether it's reverse auctions or whether it's getting the FITs right or whatever it is, we've got to find a way to solve these economic and social and environmental problems by finding ways to trade off the societal and the community and all those other benefits. And we're going to have to wear something somewhere along the line if we're going to do that.
Yeah, I'll go here. Closer.
Thank you. My question's to Jack. You probably know we've got a new Labor government that has instigated 70 inquiries. 2 of those relate to us. There's an inquiry on a pricing inquiry on electricity,